The story opens in a chaotic, luxury penthouse that sounds more like a war zone than a home, where Amani Lewis, an invisible maid in a gray uniform, is quietly scrubbing the marble floors. The high-end atmosphere is shattered by the deafening screams of twin infants and the shouting of Dante Russo, a handsome but disheveled Asian mafia boss who is at his breaking point. A suitcase sits prominently in the center of the room with a large tag reading Nanny 10, fired, marking the exit of yet another employee as Dante yells, "Get out!" The desperate father, Dante, collapses onto his sofa, clutching his hair in defeat, while the housekeeper watches helplessly with a tray of cold noodles. Amani, who usually goes unnoticed, faces a critical choice: stay invisible or step in. Touching the gold cross at her neck, she decides to intervene, walking calmly to the crib to pick up the screaming Leo. She hums a low, soulful gospel melody that brings a miraculous, sudden silence to the room. Stunned by the feat that 10 professionals couldn't achieve, Dante immediately offers her a job she can't refuse, triple her salary, forcing Amani to trade her cleaning rag for a place in his dangerous world. The silence in the penthouse was heavier than the screaming had been moments ago. Amani Lewis stood by the crib, the weight of the sleeping infant, Leo, solid and warm against her chest. She could feel the eyes of Dante Russo burning into her, not with the anger he'd shown the fleeing nanny, but with a terrifying intensity that made her grip the baby a little tighter. "You," Dante breathed, the word cracking in the middle. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, his expensive suit rumpled, dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. "What did you do?" "I just held him, sir," Amani whispered, terrified she had overstepped. She lowered her gaze to the marble floor she had been scrubbing 10 minutes ago. "Babies. They can feel tension. Sometimes they just need a hug." Dante stood up slowly, the movement stiff. He looked from the suitcase marked Nanny number 10 to Amani, then back to the miraculously sleeping twins. "You're hired." Amani blinked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Excuse me?" "Triple your salary," Dante said, stepping closer. The desperation coming off him was palpable, a physical wave of heat. "Live in, full benefits, whatever you want." "Mr. Russo, I'm not a nanny," Amani said, her voice trembling slightly. She shifted Leo to her other shoulder, her hand automatically patting his back in a rhythmic soothe. "I'm the cleaner. I don't have certifications. I don't have references for this." "I don't care about references," Dante snapped, running a hand through his hair. "I fired 10 women with references this week. 10 experts who let my children scream until they turned blue." He pointed a shaking finger at the crib. "You walked in here with a bucket and a rag and did in 30 seconds what they couldn't do in 3 days. You're hired." Amani looked at the older housekeeper, who was still clutching the tray of cold noodles, offering a small, encouraging nod. Then she looked down at the baby in her arms. Leo let out a soft sigh, his tiny fist curling into the fabric of her gray uniform. He smelled like milk and expensive baby lotion, a stark contrast to the bleach and ammonia that usually clung to her skin. She needed the money. God knew she needed the money. But this man, this world, it was dangerous. "I have conditions," Amani said softly. Dante stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Name them." Amani touched the gold cross at her throat, the metal cool against her skin. "I wear my cross. I don't hide my faith. And I sing to them, my music, not whatever classical tapes the experts recommend." Dante didn't even blink. "Done. And," Amani added, her voice gaining a fraction more steel, "I'm not wearing this uniform. If I'm their nanny, I'm not the help. I'm their caretaker." Dante looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. He saw the gray uniform, the worn shoes, the defiant tilt of her chin. "Burn the uniform," he said. "Buy whatever you need, just don't put him down." Amani nodded slowly. She walked over to the armchair where Dante had been spiraling only moments before and sat down, adjusting Leo in her lap. The transition was instant and absolute. She wasn't just the girl who cleaned the toilets anymore. She looked at Dante, who was watching her with an expression that looked painfully like hope. "Go sleep, Mr. Russo," Amani said gently. "I've got them." For a second, Dante looked like he might argue, but the exhaustion finally won. He nodded, turned, and walked toward his bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. Amani sat alone in the dim luxury of the penthouse, the silence settling around her like a heavy coat. wondering if she had just saved herself or walked willingly into the lion's den. The penthouse was a fortress disguised as a home. A sprawling labyrinth of chrome, glass, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city but let in zero warmth. Amani felt small walking the corridors without her cleaning cart. Her new freedom felt like exposure. Every surface gleamed with a sterile perfection that made her afraid to touch anything, lest she leave a smudge that would scream, "You don't belong here." She headed toward the kitchen to warm bottles, passing the security station near the private elevator. The monitors cast a blue glow over the faces of 3 men in dark suits. One of them, a burly man with a scar running through his eyebrow, snickered as she passed. "Look at that," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "Cinderella thinks she's royalty now because she changed a diaper. How long you think she lasts? I give it 2 days before the boss screams her out the door." Amani kept her eyes forward, her hand brushing the cross at her neck. "Let them talk," she told herself. "They protect the door. I protect the children." When she returned to the nursery, Dante was there. He wasn't looking at the twins. He was standing by the window, back turned to the cribs, barking orders into his phone about shipments and timelines. Bella was cooing softly, reaching for the mobile above her, but Leo was beginning to fuss, his little face scrunching up in the prelude to a meltdown. Dante hung up and turned, his face hardening as Leo let out his first sharp cry. "He's starting again," Dante said, his voice flat, detached. "Handle it. That's what I'm paying you for." Amani set the bottles down on the changing table. The coldness in his tone raised the hair on her arms. He looked at his son like he was a defective product, a problem to be solved with money and staff. "He isn't a plumbing leak, Mr. Russo," Amani said, surprised by her own boldness. She picked up Leo, who immediately rooted against her chest, seeking comfort. "You can't just handle a baby." Dante checked his watch, already mentally moving to the next room. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. Quiet him down." "No." The word hung in the air, sharp and absolute. Dante froze, his head snapping up. "Excuse me? I said no." Amani's heart thundered, but she stepped closer to him, invading the personal space that everyone else in the penthouse seemed terrified to breach. "He doesn't need a bottle. He's not wet, he's lonely. He knows my heartbeat now, but he doesn't know yours. I don't have time for—" "Make time." Amani extended her arms, offering the fussing infant to the most dangerous man in the city. "You are his father, not his boss. Hold him." Dante stared at the bundle in her arms as if it were a bomb. For a moment, Amani thought he might fire her, or worse. The air crackled with his suppressed temper. But Amani didn't waver, her dark eyes locking onto his, challenging him not with aggression, but with truth. Slowly, stiffly, Dante reached out. Amani guided his hands, adjusting his grip so he supported Leo's neck. "Relax your shoulders," she murmured, stepping back. "He feels your stress. Just breathe." Dante stood rigid, looking down at the small, squirming life in his arms. Leo blinked, his cries tapering off into small, wet hiccups. The baby stared up at Dante, his dark eyes identical to the man holding him. Dante's breath hitched, his thumb, almost of its own volition, brushed against Leo's tiny, soft cheek. "See?" Amani said softly, her voice blending with the hum of the city far below. "He's not a problem, he's your son." Dante didn't speak. He just stood there, caught in the terrifying gravity of his own child, looking for the first time like a father instead of a king. Over the next 2 weeks, the penthouse began to lose its resemblance to a mausoleum. It happened in small, defiant increments. The stark, monochrome nursery was invaded by color. Yellow knitted blankets Amani brought from her own small apartment, a vibrant mobile of dancing lions she hung over the cribs, and the constant, rich sound of Mahalia Jackson filling the once silent hallways. The sterile smell of industrial cleaner was replaced by the warm scents of lavender oil and shea butter. Even the burly guards seemed to walk softer, the perpetual scowls on their faces smoothing out as the tension in the house uncoiled. Amani moved through the luxury with a purpose that had nothing to do with enjoying the wealth and everything to do with survival. Late one night, after finally getting the twins down, she sat on the edge of the plush guest bed that was now hers, her phone pressed to her ear. "I sent the transfer, Mama," she whispered, her voice cracking with fatigue. "It's triple what I usually send. Tell the doctor to schedule the procedure. No, don't worry about me. It's fine. The babies are good. She rubbed her aching temples, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. I'm safe here, I promise. She hung up and touched the cross at her throat, a silent prayer for forgiveness for the lie. She wasn't safe, and she knew it, but the money was the difference between life and death for the woman on the other end of the line. In the master study, a room bathed in shadow and the hum of servers, Dante Russo sat before a wall of monitors. Usually, these screens were his window into threats, rival movements, perimeter breaches, employee theft. But lately, Channel 4, the nursery feed, was the only one that held his attention. He watched Imani in the grain of the night vision camera. She was pacing the room with Bella, who was fighting sleep. Imani wasn't just walking, she was swaying, a slow, rhythmic dance to a song Dante couldn't hear but could imagine. He watched the way she tucked the blanket around Leo, her hand lingering on his back to check his breathing, a gesture Dante realized he had started mimicking when he held them. She was the only splash of warmth in his cold, gray world. He saw her rub her lower back, wincing as she sat in the stiff, designer Italian leather chair he had insisted on keeping in the nursery because it matched the aesthetic. He saw her shiver in the drafty air conditioning that he kept at a meat locker temperature to keep himself alert. The next evening, Imani returned to the nursery after her break to find the room changed. The sleek, uncomfortable leather chair was gone. In its place sat a plush, overstuffed glider upholstered in soft, warm velvet, the kind of chair made for hours of holding a child, not for looking good in a magazine. Folded neatly on the armrest was a thick, cashmere shawl in a deep, rich burgundy. There was no note. Dante Russo didn't write notes, but as Imani sat down, sinking into the cushions that supported her aching back, and wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, she looked up at the camera in the corner of the room. The red light blinked steadily back at her. For the first time, the surveillance didn't feel like a threat. It felt, strangely, like being watched over. She pulled the shawl tighter, breathing in the scent of new fabric, and for a fleeting moment, the penthouse felt a little less like a cage and a little more like a home. The envelope sat on the center of Dante's mahogany desk like a landmine. It was plain, unmarked, and had bypassed 3 layers of security to get there. Dante stared at it for a long moment before sliding a letter opener under the flap. Inside there was no demand for money, no letter of extortion, just a single 8x10 glossy photograph. It was taken from a distance, through the leaves of a tree, but the focus was razor sharp. It showed Imani at the park, 3 blocks away. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the autumn sun catching the gold cross at her throat. Leo was strapped to her chest in a carrier and she was pushing Bella in the stroller. They looked happy. They looked normal. On the back of the photo, scrawled in black marker, were 3 words: pretty new weakness. Dante felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold. The warmth that had crept into the penthouse over the last 2 weeks evaporated instantly. He had let his guard down. He had allowed color and music and softness into his fortress. And now, the wolves were circling the light. He hit the intercom button. Send Imani in. Now. When Imani entered the study, she was smiling, a burp cloth thrown over her shoulder. Did you need something, Mr. Russo? Bella just went down, and... Pack your bags, Dante said, not looking up from the desk. He kept his voice stripped of emotion, cold and jagged. I want you out of here in an hour. The silence that followed was different from the peaceful silence she usually brought. This was the silence of a vacuum. Sir? You're fired, Dante said, finally looking up. He forced his eyes to be hard, to look at her with the same disdain he'd held for the first 9 nannies. This isn't working out. The severance package is generous. Go. Imani took a step forward, confusion furrowing her brow. Mr. Russo, I don't understand. Just this morning you said Leo was finally gaining weight. You said. I said get out. Dante slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Imani didn't flinch. She didn't run. She stood her ground, her eyes searching his face, looking past the anger to the terror vibrating underneath. Her gaze drifted to the desk, to the photograph lying face up. Slowly, she walked over and picked it up. She stared at the image of herself and the children. She flipped it over and read the message. Her hand trembled, just once before she set it back down. They're watching us, she said quietly. They're watching you, Dante corrected, his voice dropping to a desperate hiss. You are a civilian, Amani. You are a soft target. They know I need you, which means they will hurt you to get to me. I am firing you to save your life. Now go. Amani looked at the photo again, then at the door leading to the hallway where the nursery lay. She thought about the money she sent home. She thought about the danger. Then she thought about Leo's weight against her chest and the way Bella gripped her finger when she drank her bottle. If she left, the next person Dante hired wouldn't love them. The next person might not notice the threats until it was too late. No, Amani said. Dante blinked. What? No, she repeated, her voice firm. She smoothed the front of her shirt, standing taller. I'm not leaving. You think sending me away makes them safe? It just leaves them alone. You can't watch them 24 hours a day, and your guards don't know that Leo stops breathing when he cries too hard. Amani, this isn't a negotiation. These people kill. Then you better double security, Amani interrupted, cutting him off with a fire he didn't know she possessed. Because I am not leaving those babies. I made a promise to God to protect them, and I don't break promises to God. She met his glare with a fierce, terrifying calm. You can drag me out, Mr. Russo, but I won't walk out. Dante stared at her, his chest heaving. He looked at the woman who had hummed his children to sleep, now standing between him and his enemies like a shield made of steel and scripture. He realized then that he couldn't fire her. Not because she refused, but because he was terrified of what would happen if she actually left. Get back to the nursery, Dante rasped, sinking into his chair. And don't go near the windows. The charity gala at the St. Cat Regis was the kind of event where the champagne cost more than Amani's tuition, and the smiles were sharper than knives. For Dante, it wasn't a party. It was a battlefield. He needed to be seen, to project strength, to show the city's underbelly that the rumors of his distraction were unfounded. He had brought the fortress with him. The penthouse suite on the top floor was secured by his best men, a gilded cage for the only things that mattered. Stay inside, Dante said, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror of the suite's foyer. He didn't look like the exhausted father who had learned to burp a baby last week. In his tuxedo, he looked like a weapon sheathed in silk. His eyes were cold, calculating, scanning the room for threats that weren't there yet. Room service is vetted. No one enters unless I call you myself. Amani stood by the door to the temporary nursery, holding a sleeping Bella. The luxury of the hotel was overwhelming. Velvet drapes, crystal chandeliers, but the air was thick with tension. We'll be fine, Dante. Just be careful. It was the first time she had used his first name without the Mr. Russo attached. He paused, his hand hovering over the door handle. He looked at her, and for a split second the mask slipped. The ruthless kingpin vanished, replaced by the man who had bought a velvet glider for a maid. Lock it behind me, he ordered, his voice rough. Then he was gone. Amani did as she was told, engaging the heavy deadbolt. She settled Bella into the portable crib next to Leo and paced the room. The silence here felt different than the penthouse. It felt temporary. Fragile. Drawn by a curiosity she couldn't suppress, she moved to the suite's balcony. It was an internal terrace, looking down 10 stories into the massive, glittering atrium where the gala was in full swing. From this height, the guests looked like ants and jewels, but she found him instantly. Dante moved through the crowd not like a guest, but like a shark gliding through a reef. People parted for him. Amani watched as a man, large, boisterous, clearly important, stepped into Dante's path, laughing too loudly, clapping a hand on Dante's shoulder. Amani's breath hitched. She saw Dante stop. He didn't shout, he didn't shove the man. He simply removed the hand from his shoulder, with a movement so precise and dismissive it made the other man freeze. Dante leaned in, whispering something that made the color drain from the stranger's face. The man stepped back, nodding frantically, practically shrinking into the floor. Dante straightened his jacket and continued walking, untouched. A chill ran down Amani's spine, making her shiver. This was the monster everyone whispered about. The man who could dismantle a life with a sentence. She touched the gold cross at her neck, the metal warm against her skin. She should be terrified. She should take the severance pay and run back to her small, safe life, where the biggest danger was unpaid bills. But as she watched him command the room, A terrifying realization bloomed in her chest. She wasn't just afraid, she was awestruck. The power he wielded, it wasn't just for show. It was the wall that kept the world away from Leo and Bella. It was the force that kept her safe. Her heart hammered a traitorous rhythm against her ribs. She wasn't just looking at a boss or a killer, she was looking at a king, and God help her, she didn't want to look away. The gala downstairs was a distant hum, a world away from the silent tension of the hotel suite. Dante returned to the room only briefly, his presence charging the air like a coming storm. He checked his phone, his jaw tight. My head of security just flagged a potential entry in the service elevator, Dante said, his voice low. He didn't look at the twins. He was already mentally in the hallway, gun drawn. I'm going to intercept them before they get near this floor. I'm leaving Marco and Silas at the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. Amani nodded, clutching the baby monitor like a lifeline. Dante, if they're here? I'll handle it, he cut her off, but his hand lingered on the doorknob for a fraction of a second too long. Lock the deadbolt behind me. He slipped out, and Amani threw the heavy bolt the metal click echoing in the large room. She pressed her ear to the wood, listening as Dante barked orders to the 2 guards stationed in the corridor, followed by the heavy thud of his footsteps, retreating toward the stairwell. For 10 minutes, there was nothing, just the low, anxious breathing of Mrs. Kim, the housekeeper, who sat on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands in her apron. It's okay, Amani whispered, though she was trying to convince herself more than the older woman. She moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. They seemed indifferent, glittering and cold. Mr. Russo is handling it. He's very good at this. Too quiet, Mrs. Kim murmured, staring at the door. It's too quiet. Then, the world ended in a snap. It wasn't an explosion. It was the sudden, violent death of electricity. The crystal chandelier overhead went dark. The gentle hum of the air conditioning cut out, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. The digital clock on the bedside table vanished. Outside the window, the city lights still blazed, which meant the blackout was isolated. It was just their floor. Oh God, Mrs. Kim whimpered, standing up and knocking her tray of tea to the floor. The porcelain shattered, the sound deafening in the dark. Shh, Amani hissed, moving instinctively toward the cribs. Leo stirred, letting out a small, confused whimper. Amani placed a hand on his chest, shushing him urgently. She looked toward the door. The electronic keypad, which glowed with a reassuring green light, was dead. The heavy magnetic seal that Dante had paid extra for, it required power. Thump. A sound from the hallway. Not the heavy, confident stride of Dante or his guards. It was the soft, wet sound of something heavy slumping against the carpet. Mrs. Kim, Amani whispered, her voice trembling but clear. Get into the bathroom. Lock the door. The guards? The housekeeper stammered. The guards aren't answering, Amani said, staring at the gap beneath the suite door. The shadow that had been blocking the light from the hallway, the shadow of Marco's boots, was gone. The handle of the suite door turned slowly. The deadbolt was still thrown, but the electronic lock was disengaged. Amani backed away, putting her body between the door and the cribs. She reached for the heavy brass lamp on the side table, ripping the cord from the wall. Dante had been lured away. The service elevator breach was a lie. The real threat wasn't in the stairwell, it was standing right outside the door. The wood of the door frame splintered with a sickening crunch. The deadbolt, the only thing standing between them and the shadows in the hallway, held for 1 second, then 2, before the heavy boot on the other side kicked it free. Amani didn't scream. Screaming wasted breath, and she needed every ounce of air in her lungs. She moved with the silent, frantic efficiency of a woman who had spent her life cleaning up messes before they could stain. She grabbed the handle of the double stroller, but the wheels squeaked on the hardwood, too loud. She abandoned it, scooping Leo into one arm and Bella into the other, their small bodies warm and terrifyingly fragile against her chest. The service hatch, Amani hissed to Mrs. Kim. The older woman was paralyzed, staring at the door as it swung slowly open. Amani didn't have a free hand to grab her. Mrs. Kim, the pantry! The sharp command broke the housekeeper's trance. She scrambled after Amani into the small kitchenette. In the wall was a discreet brushed steel door used for contactless room service delivery. It was small, Too small for an adult, but deep enough for a tray, or two infants. Amani placed the babies inside the cold metal box. Leo's eyes were wide, reflecting the faint moonlight from the window, but miraculously he didn't cry. He looked at Amani with a solemn, ancient trust that nearly broke her knees. "Shh," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead and then Bella's. "Angels are watching. Be quiet as mice." She closed the hatch and engaged the heavy service lock. It wouldn't hold forever, but it was steel. It was better than her arms. "Get under the sink," Amani ordered Mrs. Kim. The housekeeper folded herself into the cabinetry, sobbing silently into her apron. Amani stood up. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Thump, 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 thump. That sounded like war drums in her ears. She looked at the closed hatch, then at the open door of the suite. If she hid, they would tear the room apart until they found the babies. If she wanted them safe, she had to be the target. She stepped out of the kitchenette and into the center of the darkened living area. Two figures emerged from the hallway shadows. They were dressed in black tactical gear, their faces covered by balaclavas. They moved with professional silence, sweeping the room with the barrels of silenced pistols. One of them saw her immediately. He didn't raise his voice, he just raised his gun. "The children," he said. His voice was mechanical, bored. "Where are they?" Amani raised her empty hands. She was shaking, her knees knocking together, but she forced her chin up. "They aren't here. Mr. Russo took them." The man stepped closer, the muzzle of the gun level with her chest. "We saw Russo leave. He was alone. Where are they?" "I told you," Amani lied, her voice gaining a desperate, jagged edge. "He took them down the service elevator 5 minutes ago. You missed him." The second man signaled to the bedroom. "Check it." "No," Amani shouted, lunging forward. It was a clumsy, desperate move, but it made the first man pause. He backhanded her, a hard, sharp blow that sent her sprawling onto the carpet. The taste of copper filled her mouth. "Check the bedroom," the leader repeated, stepping over her. Amani scrambled up. Her hand brushed against the wall, her fingers curling around the cold metal canister mounted there. The red fire extinguisher. She had dusted it just an hour ago. As the second man turned his back to breach the bedroom, Amani ripped the pin out. She didn't aim for the fire, she aimed for their faces. With a primal scream that was more lioness than Maid, she squeezed the trigger. A cloud of white chemical powder exploded into the room, a blinding, choking fog. The men shouted, coughing, their night vision useless in the opaque whiteout. Amani didn't run away. She swung the heavy steel canister like a club. It connected with the leader's shoulder with a brutal clang, sending him stumbling back into the coffee table. "Get out!" she screamed, swinging again, swinging wildly into the white mist, putting herself between the monsters and the pantry door. She wasn't a soldier. She was a cleaner. And she was going to scrub them from this earth or die trying. The silence on the radio was louder than a gunshot. Dante froze halfway down the service stairwell, his hand pressed to his earpiece. "Marco? Silas?" Static. "It's a decoy," Dante growled, the realization hitting him like a physical blow to the gut. He didn't wait for confirmation. He spun on his heel, taking the stairs 3 at a time, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had left them. He had walked away and left the only things that mattered in a room, protected by a deadbolt and a prayer. When he reached the hallway of the suite, the smell of cordite and ozone hung heavy in the air. Marco and Silas were slumped against the wall, unconscious, their weapons gone. The door to the suite, the door he had told Amani to lock, was shattered, hanging off its hinges like a broken jaw. Dante didn't think. He didn't feel fear. He felt a cold, black rage that eclipsed everything else. He raised his weapon and stepped through the threshold, expecting to see carnage. He expected to see empty cribs and a body on the floor. Instead, he walked into a cloud. The suite was filled with a thick, choking white fog. Chemical powder coated the velvet drapes, the crystal chandelier, and the hardwood floors. It swirled in the air, limiting visibility to a few feet. Through the haze, Dante heard coughing, wretched, hacking coughs that sounded nothing like a baby and everything like a man choking on his own lungs. A figure stumbled out of the white mist, rubbing furiously at his eyes with one hand, his other waving a pistol blindly. Dante didn't hesitate. He moved with the efficiency of a machine, stepping inside the man's guard. He grabbed the gunman's wrist, twisting it until bones snapped, and drove the butt of his own weapon into the man's temple. The intruder dropped without a sound. Dante scanned the room, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Amani?" There was no answer. Just a groan from the floor near the coffee table. Dante moved forward, sweeping the room. He found the second attacker on his knees, retching, his face caked in white powder, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead where something heavy had connected with bone. Dante silenced him with a swift kick to the jaw, rendering him unconscious. The room fell silent. The white dust began to settle, drifting down like toxic snow. "Amani!" Dante roared, the panic finally cracking his voice. "Don't come closer." The scream came from the kitchenette. It was ragged, terrified, and fierce. Dante lowered his weapon, squinting through the haze. Amani was standing in front of the small service pantry door. She looked like a specter rising from the dust. Her gray uniform was covered in white powder, her hair wild, her lips split and bleeding. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered, but she wasn't cowering. She was standing in a wide, defensive stance, holding the heavy red fire extinguisher raised above her head like a warhammer. She blinked, her eyes streaming with tears from the chemical irritation, trying to focus on the figure emerging from the fog. When she finally recognized him, the fire extinguisher didn't lower. She held it tighter. "Dante?" she choked out. "It's me," he said, holstering his gun and holding up his empty hands. He walked toward her, stepping over the broken glass and the unconscious bodies of men twice her size. "It's me, Amani. You did it. You stopped them." She stared at him, her chest heaving. They asked where the babies were. "Where are they?" Dante asked gently, reaching out to take the heavy canister from her shaking hands. Amani let go of the weapon and slumped against the wall, her legs finally giving out. She pointed a trembling finger behind her, to the locked metal door of the service pantry. "Safe," she whispered. I told them you took them." Dante looked at the terrified woman who had blinded hitmen and stood her ground against monsters to protect children that weren't even hers. He looked at the locked hatch, where his legacy was safe and sound. He dropped to his knees in the white dust, not to check the enemies, but to catch her before she hit the floor. The penthouse was quiet again, but it was no longer the cold, terrified silence of a tomb. It was the heavy, exhausted silence of survival. The white chemical dust had been swept away by a cleaning crew that moved faster and more discreetly than the police. The broken door was already being measured for replacement. But in the nursery, the world had shrunk down to the soft glow of the nightlight and the rhythmic breathing of 4 people. Amani sat in the velvet glider, wincing slightly as Dante pressed a cold compress to the bruise blooming on her cheekbone. He had dismissed the concierge doctor, insisting on doing this himself. The man who had broken a hitman's wrist an hour ago was now cleaning a small cut on Amani's lip with hands that were impossibly steady and gentle. "I'm fine, Dante," Amani murmured, trying to pull away. "It's just a scratch. You should check on Leo again." "Leo is asleep," Dante said, his voice low and rough. "Bella is asleep. You are the one bleeding." He didn't pull back. He dabbed the antiseptic on her skin, his dark eyes tracing the line of her jaw. "You attacked armed men with a fire extinguisher." Amani managed a weak, lopsided smile. "I didn't have a gun. I improvised." Dante didn't smile back. He set the medical kit on the side table and sat on the ottoman in front of her, leaning forward until their knees brushed. "You didn't run. You could have hidden in the panic room. You could have saved yourself. But you stood in front of that door." "They wanted the babies," Amani said simply, as if that explained everything, as if there had been no other choice in the world. "I told you, I don't break promises." Dante looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the last of his defenses crumble. The fortress he had built around his life, the walls of money and violence and distance had failed, but Amani hadn't. She was the only fortification that held. "I can't pay you for this," Dante said quietly. Amani stiffened slightly, the old fear flickering in her eyes. You're firing me again?" "No," Dante said firmly. He reached out, taking her hand. His grip was warm, grounding. "I'm saying I can't pay you because you aren't an employee anymore. You don't pay family to protect their own." Amani's breath hitched. "Family? I can't do this alone," Dante admitted, the vulnerability stark in his voice. "And I don't want to. Stay. Not as the nanny, not as the help. Stay because we need you, because I need you. He wasn't offering a contract, he was offering a life. It was dangerous, yes. It was complicated. But as Imani looked at him, seeing the man behind the myth, she realized she had already made this choice the moment she picked up the fire extinguisher. She squeezed his hand back. Okay, she whispered. I'm staying. Dante let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. He moved from the ottoman to the arm of the glider, pulling her close, resting his forehead against hers. Across the room, the twins slept peacefully in their cribs, safe under the watch of the lion and the lioness. In the center of the living room, the spot where the suitcase marked Nanny number 10 had once sat was empty. The floor was clean, the baggage was gone, and for the first time in a long time, the house was full.